This is Joe Green, head pastor of St. Paul Missionary Baptist Church, located in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, also the founder of the 2019 movement. And I want to share a couple of thoughts with you. You know, when we look at the media, I'm going to paraphrase a famous quote by Malcolm X, civil rights leader of the 60s. And he said, the media is the most powerful force in the world. He said they can make an innocent person look guilty and a guilty person look innocent. And I'd have to agree with it that over the ages, those who wanted to control the population or the masses, they wanted to control the public opinion. They've learned to use the media. You know, back in Europe during the time of the Second World War, there was a gentleman by the name of Edward Bernays, and Edward Bernays, he came up with, he's known as the father of modern propaganda. And now they call it public relations because propaganda got a bad rap, if you so to speak, because the Nazis perfected how to use propaganda. Not just the Nazis, but the Nazis more recently, more specifically, learned to use propaganda in a way to get the public to go along with their agenda, to promote their agenda, and also get caught up in the ideas that the Nazis were trying to promote. And so the same ideology was studied and brought to the Western world and has been used for some time now. And you got to realize that the media it's owned by, and it is a propaganda tool of the global elite, the ruling elite. You know, 90% of the media is owned by only 6 corporations, and all of these corporations are what you would call multinational corporations, international, they have international reach. They also, the people that sit on that own these media sources, or the people that are high up on the board, they're all part of things like the Bilderberg Group and some of these other secret societies. And they sit around and they kind of exchange ideas. Also, you should understand that Marxism is the ideology behind globalism, also known as the internationalism. Now, what is globalism? In a nutshell, globalists are people that want to form a one world governmental system. They believe that they are the ruling elite class that have the right and the knowledge and the wisdom to rule over the masses. And so because they believe that, they don't believe that the masses, and I'm talking about the majority of the human population, they don't believe that they're smart enough or sophisticated enough to rule over themselves, so that they are the ones who have the only solution to rule over society and to bring world peace and those type of things. Now, if you get a chance to read some of the ancient philosophers like Plato, Socrates, or whatever, they have this type of mentality that they call themselves like the ruling class, but also they are like the thinkers, the smart people, right? Those who have the intellectuals, if you will, the ruling intellectuals that are behind the scenes, and they believe they have the answers, right? So when you read their books, when you read some of the propaganda, then these are the things that they believe in. So, and if you look at some of my YouTube videos, and I ask you to please subscribe to my channel, page through the YouTube, my YouTube channels. I've done a lot of videos on it. I give sources. I tell you where I get this information from. But ultimately, I use the actual quotes from the people that that believe in this. You know, one of the families, ruling elite families, is the Rockefeller family. Now, all of us probably have heard of the Rockefeller family. The Rockefeller family were very instrumental in helping to form the United Nations, and actually the land where the United Nations in New York it sits on actually was donated by the Rockefeller family, or the Rockefeller Foundation. The Rockefeller family was behind in the promotion of the eugenics movement of the early part of the 20th century. And when I talk about eugenics, which means ethnic cleansing or racial cleansing, and so the Nazis in Germany were funded in part by the Rockefeller Foundation. Margaret Sanger and the foundation of Planned Parenthood was funded in part by the Rockefeller Foundation. And they've done a lot of things under the guise of doing things for the public good. But when you really drill down to it, the philosophy behind what they're doing is globalism. And so in globalism, they believe that the ruling elite are not only the ones who have the knowledge, the wisdom, and the intellect to rule over the masses, but the masses are too ignorant and too stupid to rule themselves. They need this ruling class of people. And ultimately, not only do they do that, but then they also believe that the world is overpopulated. And so in order to really rule over the world and to have the world to live in peace and harmony, you need to limit things to a certain amount of people. And I've heard some of them are quoted as saying 500 million. Ted Turner was one of them, the founder of CNN. He said that there's too many people. And so global warming, the ideology behind global warming is based on this ideology of population control. He said that there should only be about 500 million people in the earth. If you ever look up the Georgia Guidestones, that there's this huge monuments that's built in Georgia, and they actually spell out the globalist agenda on how to have world peace. And one of their principles is to keep the population of the world below 500,000 people. Now, if you hear people like Bill Gates, who also has a similar ideology, he said 1 billion, maybe under 1 billion people. Now, that sounds like it's all fun and games, except for when you start to realize that there's over 7 billion people in the earth. So how do you get from 7 billion down to 1 billion or down to 500 million? And this is all well documented. You can look it up for yourselves. They're on record saying this. You can see the video, the news sources, and all these other things where they actually publicly say these things because, like I said, they believe they have the supreme intellect and that they are smarter than everybody else. And so they can even say things very bluntly and matter-of-factly, and they know that most people don't read, or they're not going to believe what they're hearing, or that it's going to be spun by the media. Going back to the media, it's going to be spun in a way that the masses can accept what they believe in, right? Because it's owned by the masses. That's their bosses. And so anyway, let's move forward. So again, everything that I tell you, it's documented. I research it out. I'm not just coming up with these wild schemes. It may sound wild to some of you because it's the first time you're hearing it, but just because it's new to you doesn't mean it's new stuff. It just means that you haven't done the research. It hasn't been brought to your attention because the media covers a lot of these things up. So let me give you a quote from David Rockefeller. David Rockefeller, one of the Rockefeller families, one of the great people, one of the wealthy, influential people from the Rockefeller family. He had a couple of quotes, but the first one I'm going to quote is he's acknowledging the media's support of the internationalist ideology. Now, they call themselves internationalists. I have David Rockefeller's book called Memoirs, where he actually says these things in his book. He confirms these things, but this one is a quote from a talk that he did. And he says, "We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subjected to the lights of publicity during those years. But the world is more sophisticated and prepared to march forward a world government. The supernatural sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practice in the past centuries." So they believe that this, as I said, these intellectual elite world bankers should rule over the masses instead of having these nations, they call it autodetermination, which autodetermination is that the people choose their own fate. So we live in a country that's supposed to be not a democracy, but a representative republic, which is different. Representative republic governed by the rule of law. And so the people, the government is of, by, and for the people. The people ultimately, based on the founding fathers' principles, should have what's called self-determination or autodetermination. We can determine through voting for political leaders, through using our constitutional rights, we can determine the direction of the country. That's what autodetermination is. But what happens is, they don't believe that the people are smart enough, sophisticated enough to make their own choices. So David Rockefeller is quoted here, and this is what they believe. Intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practice in past centuries. So he's confirming what I'm telling you, that the media is complicit in that, and mainly because not only is the media owned by these ruling elite people, but also they entice them with money. They entice them with fame and popularity. If you want to get promoted to the high levels in various industries, you have to play ball. And so that's how they get people to go along with them. Here's another quote from David Rockefeller, and this talks to them being internationalists or globalists, if you will. "For more than a century, ideological extremists at either end of the political spectrum have seized upon the well-publicized incidents, such as my encounter with Castro, to attack the Rockefeller family for the inordinate influence they claim we wield over American political and economic institutions. Some even believe that we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists. and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political economic structure, one world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty and proud of it. And so he's confirming what we're saying, and this is out of his book called Memoirs, which is his autobiography. And so they're actually saying it, but like I said, most people don't read for themselves. They won't research, or they'll take their cues from the media, which is actually owned by the same people that we're talking about, these internationalists. Now, what happens is the Bible says that the love of money is the root of all evil. So their motivation is money, right? Many of the evil and the atrocities that happen in the world is based on money. It's not based on emotions. And because we try to discern them or try to make sense of them through our emotions, we lose it, right? So for instance, slavery. Slavery wasn't based on race at first. Slavery was based on economics. The whole idea of slavery, which was indentured servitude, which became chattel slavery. Chattel slavery is when people become property, and it began focused primarily on African Americans. At first, slavery wasn't just African American people from Africa. I'm sorry, it was white people, Europeans as well. But what happens is they promoted the ideal of race and separation of race, which race is a social construct. It's not a real thing. It's a social construct. They promoted the idea of race to separate and divide us, and also to perpetuate the idea that black people were less evolved so that they can be enslaved. But it was based on money. It was based on resources. And many people, especially those in the South, even the churches, some of the Baptists, Southern Baptists, and some of the other people, they condoned slavery because of the economics, because of the wealth that was built because of it, and so it's important for us to understand that the love of money is the root of all evil. It's not based on most of this stuff is not based on hatred for black people. It's based on economics. The prison industrial complex, because we have historically had an unjust, there has been bias in the criminal justice system, but you have privatized prisons and you have different things like that. You had convict leasing and all these things. This was based on economics. It wasn't based on race. But because we're focusing on race and not on the economic part of it, we miss the ball and we never come to a resolution. Things like that. All of these things. Even let me tell you what happens in some of the inner cities, right? So a lot of these inner cities, there's broken families. You have single mothers who are raising their sons, right? You have their sons that's being raised by a single mom. A lot of times they lack discipline. They go to school. They may have short attention spans. They don't listen. And because of that, instead of understanding that the problem is that they need discipline and correction and structure, instead of that, they say they have a learning disability. Now, how is this based on money? Because once a student has a learning disability, the school district gets more money for special education. And many times these single mom parents that are struggling financially, they begin to get a check because their child now has special needs. So the parent doesn't go kick against the designation of learning disability. They just go along with it. Sometimes the doctors have prescribed medication, and so that's another money for the health insurance money that's being paid out, right? And the school gets more money, and a lot of these inner city school districts are struggling. So any extra resources they can get, they accept it. So that's based on money, right? So many failing school districts, there's a financial incentive for them not to begin to excel. And then it perpetuates a cycle of brokenness, broken communities, all these type of things. But understand it goes back to money, right? And so I'm going to talk very briefly about reparations. Then I'm going to give you a couple more quotes, and I'm not going to, won't be a super long video. Now, Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War. Again, a lot of people think that the primary thing behind the Civil War was slavery. That was a large part of it. It was mainly states' rights, and many of the southern states didn't want to get rid of the institution of slavery because of how much wealth was being brought into their communities, right? But I want to stress that although slavery was economic, right, a lot of people went along with it because of the money in the South. But I want to stress that it's not the government. The government doesn't make money, right? Governments don't make a profit. Governments just make money from taxes. The people that benefited from slavery economically were institutions, corporations, and industries with the government oversight. And because the people, industries and people, and vote for politicians, they fund political they fund political campaigns, et cetera, et cetera. You had politicians that went along with the whole idea of slavery because of the money that they were receiving many times from these large corporations. So schools like Georgetown University, Harvard University, Wells Fargo Bank, New York Life, life insurance companies, certain industries like the cotton industry of the South, these large corporations, they benefited from slave labor, which is why they perpetuated the idea of slavery. Not because necessarily they hated black people or not, but they used the media in order to promote the idea that blacks were inferior, first of all, and then after the abolishment of slavery, they promoted this idea of the criminal black man, right? You be afraid of these black men, they're going to hurt you. And so it started the prison industrial complex, where what they would do is they would incarcerate black males falsely, put them in jail, put them on the chain gang that not only helped to rebuild the South after the Civil War, but also they would lease them out to corporations and industries like, farming, agricultural, other kind of mining industries and different things like that. They had what was known as convict leasing. And so again, that was based on money. So as we promote the idea or the conversation about reparations, we as black Americans shouldn't be going to the government asking them for a huge check for everybody who's a descendant of slavery. What should be done is we should go to the government and have them to create some type of consortium or some type of organization that actually will oversee these corporations that benefited from slavery, giving benefit back to those who were descendants of slaves, right? Georgetown University has already started that. They acknowledge that they benefited financially from the slave trade, and because of that, they give some incentives for those who are descendants of slaves to get an education through Georgetown. So I have a whole nother thing that I wrote out about it. Basically, reparations through these corporations should be done through education, so free education for descendants of slaves based on institutions that benefited financially from free slave labor or trading of slaves, land ownership, right? Even you think about a corporation like Wells Fargo, they gained a lot of wealth through the slave trade. And so in order to repay, to reparate those who benefited, they benefited off of, maybe the descendants of those slaves could get preferable loans or certain amount of money towards a mortgage, property ownership, right? So education, property ownership, and the third is business. So when you think about things like Black Wall Street and Rosewood and those places, they were communities, thriving black communities that were destroyed because of the wealth that they were creating, right? And then there was laws that were passed that created unfair trade. When I say trade, I'm saying like monopolies and different things like that, the black corporations couldn't compete. So the third one would be business, maybe business loans by these financial institutions or grants to create small businesses. And the reason I say that because of the fact that, and it may seem like I'm rambling, but I'm bringing this full circle. The reason that it's important to do it that way as opposed to just giving people money, because when you have a culture and a community and individuals that are broken, that are disenfranchised and lack personal identity, then you can't just give them money because money doesn't solve the problem, right? Money a lot of times just digs a deeper hole. So whether you have drug abuse or whether you have whatever case may be, a lot of times if you don't help to get the foundational problems, then it just perpetuates the cycle and then they're broke again, and nothing changes, right? So a person who comes from that community, think about if they come out with a 4-year degree or a master's degree or associate's degree and they have a skill or a trade or their mindset has just changed. Now you can help to break the cycle of brokenness, of disenfranchisement and poverty, which is a spirit, right? Land ownership, those type of things. Land ownership is one of the ways that people have built wealth historically. Like whether it's you pass down land to your children or a child inherits a house or land, and then it's part of the inheritance, right? So money is the key. But anyway, this whole ideology of the international bankers, the cabal that has been really pushing and continues to push. Marxism, as I said, is the ideology that the globalists use to promote, to gain control over the masses, so the masses give up their rights in exchange for safety and security and taking care of your, like right now socialism is being pushed. So people say everybody should get free health care, like Cardi B, free health care, not just her, but she more outspoken recently on an interview she did. Free college education, all these type of things, just giving someone something free like that, somebody will pay for it. So if the government's just giving out free stuff, that means somebody else through their taxpayer dollars will pay for it, or your taxes will go up. Right. So anyway, this goes back a long way. The international bankers, many people believe the Civil War, a lot of that was based on the international bankers trying to influence themselves over this nation and being pushed back. Because there were many years that because the Federal Reserve is part of the international banking. It's a private organization owned by the international bankers. And so it was illegal for the Federal Reserve to be in America until 1913. And so then after that, you had the Federal Reserve Act, and then you had the implementation of the IRS 20 years later, but that's a whole nother talk. But anyway, many people believe that it was the bankers and not the racist Southern slave owners that were really pushed for the Civil War. Because what the bankers would do is they would loan money to people to fund wars, and they still do that. They loan money to nations to fund wars, and then they profit off of it, and then they get to a place where they loan money to both sides, so it doesn't matter who wins the war, they still profit off of it. Anyway, this is Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln quote, it says, I have two great enemies, the Southern army in front of me and the bankers in the rear. Of the two, the one at my rear is my greatest foe. So he was acknowledging the international bankers were his biggest threat, not only to his presidency, but to America. Many people believe because John Wilkes Booth was considered a high-ranking Mason. He was part of the secret societies, and he may have been put up to assassinate Lincoln. This is a quote from JFK. JFK, who was also assassinated. JFK passed a executive order, I think it was 1001, where he was taking the ability to print money away from the Federal Reserve and putting it back into Congress, because our Constitution said that Congress is the one that's supposed to be the ones that create money, not the Federal Reserve. But right now the Federal Reserve does. So here's President JFK, this is a long quote, and I'm going to bring this full circle. But President JFK said, the very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. Our way of life is under attack. Those who make themselves our enemy are advancing around the globe. No war ever posed a greater threat to our security. If you are awaiting a finding of clear and present danger, then I can only say that the danger has never been more clear and its presence has never been more imminent. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies upon primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system that has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumors printed, and no secret is revealed. That's President John F. Kennedy, April 27th, 1961, in a speech about the global bankers, and he was trying to warn people about it, and even put in an executive order to take away the power of the Federal Reserve to print money. And so I think it's important for us to understand what we're facing here. As we see Marxism rising, socialism rising, these ideologies rising, it is simply the tool of the international bankers to get the masses to turn over their rights, their individual freedoms, under the guise of being protected by the powers that be. And so anyway, stay tuned for more videos. Please subscribe. Please share this video. You have to know your real enemy. And a lot of people, especially in Christian circles, will say, well, you focus on the negative. But you guys got to realize that just like a doctor, when he goes to medical school, they teach him about diseases and the effects of diseases. They teach him about the symptoms of certain diseases so that they can prescribe a cure. If you don't know the disease that you're facing, if you don't know the threat that you're facing, then you can't properly diagnose the solution without properly understanding what the real threat is. This has been Joseph Green, head pastor of St. Paul Missionary Baptist Church in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, also the founder of the 2019 movement. Until next time, peace and blessings to you. Shalom, shalom.